The Falcons' path to stability at quarterback is leading them towards Kirk Cousins.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. But you may also know me as Sirius Black. You may also know me as Mr. Drew. You may also know me as the Jolly Green Giant. And you may also know me as Mr. AKA, and I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. All you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast. And if you are an everydayer, then today's episode is great for you because it proves why you should be an everydayer. But also on today's episode, we'll be talking about the mock draft Monday, right? It is that, and we'll get into a mock that has the Falcons taking Dallas Turner in the first round. We'll talk about Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy's blazing 40 at the combine, some other 40 times and wide receivers that tested that could now be on the Falcons radar. But we got to talk to the everydayers who are sitting here proselytizing and sowing the seeds and preaching the good word about this illustrious podcast, because you've heard a lot of buzz from various, credible outlets like The Athletic and ESPN over the last couple of days that are also outing themselves as everydayers, right? Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot did that earlier in the week when they spoke to the media on Tuesday. But now you got Adam Schefter and Diana Rossini and so many others that are also everydayers. Why? Because they're saying all the same things that you've been hearing on this podcast for 2+ weeks, if not much longer, when it comes to the Falcons being potentially interested in Kirk Cousins, and especially Kirk Cousins over Justin Fields being sort of the Falcons' plan, right? And, there was also some Baker Mayfield buzz over the last couple of days that, he could be potentially on the radar. We had Baker Mayfield as the Falcons' sort of plan F at the quarterback position, but maybe he should leapfrog Russell Wilson, who was plan E, and possibly leapfrog Justin Fields as plan D. So we'll see what happens with the Falcons quarterback situation. We're about 10 days away from the start of the new league year, and we'll probably have some answers, maybe not all the answers, but some of the answers in the next 10 days when it comes to who the next Falcons quarterback is going to be. But I think far too many people and a lot of fans, and it's understandable, right, that they approach this answer and answering this question of who the Falcons quarterback is, what do I think the Falcons should do, right? As opposed to what my priority is on this podcast is me telling you what I think the Falcons will do. And I don't think enough people think about this quarterback situation from the Falcons' perspective. They just base it off of what they think the Falcons should do at the quarterback position. And that has led to a lot of people, pushing for Justin Fields because, they have, positive opinions about Justin Fields and what he can do as a quarterback. But the problem with Justin Fields is, not really based off what he's on the field, but really the idea that Justin Fields is not a long-term solution at this point in time. Like, maybe he turns into a long-term solution if he works out, but that is a much bigger if to people in NFL circles. And that's been sort of the emerging thing that's come out over the last couple of days. That's a much bigger if to people in the NFL than it is probably to your average person on Twitter, right? And I've seen this the last couple of weeks from several Falcon fans and others, that the assumption is that a lot of people think that the Falcons or any team that acquires Justin Fields is going to pick up his 5th-year option. And we've talked about before on this podcast how that's doubtful given what recently happened with the Carolina Panthers doing that when they traded for Sam Darnold and locking yourself into $22 million in guaranteed money, sight unseen for Justin Fields, given how little he's proven at this level in the NFL. And instead, what you're likely to see from a team that does wind up acquiring Justin Fields, whether it's the Falcons or somebody else, is they're going to do what the Packers did a year ago when it came to Jordan Love, right? And the Packers did not pick up Jordan Love's fifth-year option. Instead, they gave him a one-year, $13.5 million extension with $9 million in incentives. They guaranteed that $13.5 million, but it was drastically lower than what they would have had to guarantee him if they had picked up the fifth-year option, which is $20 million, right? And the cap hit for that second year, 2024, this upcoming season, was only $13 million. And theoretically, the Packers could get out of that if they wanted to, but obviously they're not going to, because just Jordan Love won his tryout. He had a one-year tryout for the Green Bay Packers. And if he had success, as he did, right, he was going to get a new extension. And all, evidence is that the Packers and Love and his representation are working on a big-time extension at some point this offseason that's going to make him one of the higher-paid quarterbacks in the NFL. But if Jordan Love didn't live up to that and lead the Packers to the playoffs and perform like a top 10, top 15 quarterback down the stretch, they would be on the hook for only $13 million, which is not cheap, but is basically high-end backup money. That would make him the highest paid backup in the NFL, ahead of guys like Zach Wilson and Taylor Heineke this year. But you're not paying him like he's one of the top starters, like a $20 million would be, like the Falcons would do with Justin Fields, guaranteeing him $22 million by picking up his fifth-year option. And so that, to me, is really for whoever winds up getting Justin Fields at some point this offseason. That is probably the outcome that they're going to do. And I know some people will be like, why would Justin Fields and his representation, David Mulugheta, agree to that? Because they don't really have a choice in the matter, because as you've heard over the last couple of days, and as you've heard on this podcast for the last 2 weeks, that the trade market for Justin Fields is not going to be particularly robust. So he's not going to have these options of being like, I refuse. There's going to be like one team that's left, not getting a quarterback in the draft, not getting Kirk Cousins, not getting Baker Mayfield, whoever that team is, then they're going to get Justin Fields. And that's going to probably be Justin Fields' only option. Now, could that be the Falcons? Sure, that's a possibility, but I don't think it's a likelihood. Now, the issue with Justin Fields, again, is why would Raheem Morris in this new regime coming in, with Terry Fontenot coming over, being a holdover, why would they sign up for a one-year rental like Justin Fields? Again, the potential there is for Justin Fields to be more than that, but the likelihood of them getting there, again, will rest on a very big if, right? Because essentially the sort of one-year rental policy is what at the core got Arthur Smith fired. If you're Raheem Morris and you saw what, this previous regime and Arthur Smith got fired because they didn't have an answer. They were basically trying to figure it out year to year at the quarterback position. And you don't want to go into this season, right, into your first job, basically doing the same thing. Oh, we'll figure it out at some point down the future. You want to have that stability for multiple years. And you're not really getting that with Justin Fields, right? But you could potentially get that with Kirk Cousins, right? You could potentially get that with your plan A, which is trading up for a quarterback, one of those top three guys, which is plan C, which is taking QB4, presumably Michigan's JJ McCarthy at 8, right? Because if you're drafting those guys, presumably, unless they're like a Zach Wilson level disaster, which we hope they're not, is going to be the case. And if you're drafting them that high, you're not going into that thinking that they are going to be that. But you're getting those guys for like at least 3 years, right? So you have that stability of, here's our guy that we're going to develop for the next 3 to 4 years. And that's something that this regime would sign up for. That's part of the reason why you've heard the buzz that the Falcons want to get a young quarterback, because it makes the most long-term sense for them to go out there and draft a quarterback that they can say, this is our guy for the next 3 to 5, possibly 7, 10 or more years. It's part of the reason why plan B is Kirk Cousins and not Justin Fields if you can't trade up, because Kirk Cousins, you're going to sign a multi-year deal, most likely a 2-year deal based off current projections, but that's a 2-year deal. That's probably going to turn into a 3-year deal, similar to the Derek Carr contract, as we saw with him if and when you restructure Kirk Cousins' second year of that contract next year, right? And so with Kirk Cousins, you're basically signing up for 3 years of Kirk Cousins. You're signing up for stability. And I've heard someone else refer to it as Kirk Cousins. Teams are going to look at Kirk Cousins in a lot of ways that the Chiefs looked at Alex Smith back in 2013 when Andy Reid first arrived on the scene, and he was their starting quarterback for 4 years. That's what teams are signing up. And again, that's not sexy. That's not the thing that's going to get people, buzzing on Twitter or wherever else people go to get that buzz. Most people go to a bar or something like that. But whatever you're looking for in that front, like Kirk Cousins is not sexy, but it's stable. And that's what keeps you employed in this league, is stability, not sex appeal. right? Sex appeal gets you headlines, but sex appeal doesn't win games. Stability does. Getting reliable performance from your quarterback position week in and week out is what wins you football games. And that's why this new regime and Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot, having already seen the sort of the writing on the wall with the guy that he came in with getting fired, and like, oh, well, we can't make that mistake again. It's just why they're going to more likely go after stability. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that. Right? Because you're getting you want to get a quarterback that you feel very confident. Like the Falcons want to come away from this offseason being like, this guy who is going to be our starting quarterback when we get to May, when we get to June and OTAs and minicamp or whatever, right? The guy that's taking those first team snaps, they want to feel like that guy is going to be their quarterback for at least 3 years, at least 3 years. And you're not really getting that with Justin Fields, but you could potentially get that with some of these alternative options like a Kirk Cousins and a draft pick. And so for that reason, when we get into the opinion portion of today's episode, that's why I sit here and I go, I think drafting the quarterback makes the most sense for me personally, because that's a much better bet that you're going to get that long-term stability because you know who your guy is, right? And that's why I've said for months now to various folks, right, that you may not love the idea of JJ McCarthy at 8, but you should make peace with it because it makes a ton of sense if the goal is to get stability at that position, right? Now, of course, we would prefer if a trade up develops, and maybe that happens. We talked about it on a recent episode where it's unlikely that that seems to be the case, but we'll see. We'll see what the Patriots do. We're just basically waiting to figure out what the Patriots do, and we got 10 days, and maybe the Patriots go out there and they sign Kirk Cousins. Maybe they go out there and sign Baker Mayfield, and all of a sudden trade talks reignite, as they've sort of seemed to cool down over the last couple of days, which is the buzz that we were talking about last episode on this podcast. But that is where we're going to leave that conversation, right? The buzz, is maybe a little bit that JJ McCarthy could go higher than 8 coming out of the combine, but we're not going to get into that on today's episode. Instead, we're going to get into the mock draft Monday portion of today's episode by looking at a mock draft that has the Falcons taking Dallas Turner, Alabama pass rusher, at 8. JJ McCarthy goes 12 in that mock draft to Denver, but we'll break, what Dallas Turner brings to the table here in Atlanta as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, the combine may be over, but the draft is ahead. But more importantly, basketball season, we're in the thick of it, and you can get buckets at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 on bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. Any winning $5 bet. That means you get $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on NBA. It's now March Madness, NCAA, quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive player props, and so much more. You want to bet on JJ McCarthy's odds of being the Falcons pick? Go ahead, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So we are continuing today's Locked On Falcons, but I want to plug the launching of the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube with Locked On Sports Today. And it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. And of course, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well here on YouTube. So let's get into the Mock Draft Monday portion, and shout out to another member of the Locked On family. That is Vinnie Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football. But we're looking at a mock draft from the Sporting News that he posted last week. And we'll go through the first 10 picks before we dive into the Falcons pick, as I've alluded to. And, he has Chicago taking Caleb Williams, the quarterback from USC, with the #1 pick. Number 2, Washington takes Drake May, the quarterback from North Carolina. 3, New England takes Jaden Daniels, the quarterback from LSU. 4, Arizona takes Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver from Ohio State. 5, the Chargers take Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia. 6, the Giants take Malik Neighbors, wide receiver, LSU. 7, the Titans take Joe Alt, offensive tackle, Notre Dame.
The 8th pick, the Atlanta Falcons select
Dallas Turner, edge rusher, Alabama. And wrapping up the top 10, the Bears at 9 take Rome Odunze, the wide receiver from Washington. And the Jets at 10 take Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle from Penn State. So one of the reasons why I liked this mock is because I think the top 3 with Williams, May, and Daniels going in that order, I think is where I think the draft is ultimately going to end up, but obviously we have, 7.5 weeks, of time to figure that out. The other part of this mock that I find interesting is Brock Bowers going 5. I've seen a lot of mocks that have that. I don't think that's likely to happen. It's not a knock on Brock Bowers, the player. I just think he's an excellent player, but I doubt he's going to be a top 10 pick when all is said and done in this draft. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Now, I personally think sitting here today, and maybe this is just because I'm riding high off of the combine, but I think we're probably going to see like 3 wide receivers go in the top 7. I think that's going to be Harrison. That's going to be Neighbors. That's going to be Odunze. Now I'm kind of, we've been penciling in the Titans to take a tackle, but then Brian Callahan, their head coach, talked about taking a wide receiver over a tackle, similar to what the Bengals did when they took Jamar Chase over Penny Sewell. And so now if one of those two guys, and Neighbors or Odunze, is going to be there, I think they're going to take that guy, and they're going to try to address their offensive line issues in free agency. But all that said, let's talk about the 8th pick, Dallas Turner. And we discussed Dallas Turner on our most recent episode, talking about his impressive testing, comparing him with Jared Verse out of Florida State, as well as Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher out of UCLA, as sort of the top 3 guys that are theoretically in the mix for the Falcons at 8. I think Turner is probably your best bet to be a top 10 pick among that trio, just because of the athleticism that he brings. And we talked in depth about, his excellent length, his burst, his speed, his bend, all those various things that translate well to him being a high-level performer and pass rusher at the next level on the most recent episode. But one of the things I've heard from various folks over the last month or two when it comes to Dallas Turner, I've seen this knock on Dallas Turner about like he lacks production. And, it's like, oh, that's a red flag for Dallas Turner. And I don't really get that, right? And I think part of that is owed to, we saw some monster production from Will Anderson, his predecessor at Alabama, his former teammate at Alabama, the last couple of seasons. But when you go just beyond just looking at how many tackles for loss and how many sacks that a guy has, actually Dallas Turner was much more productive as a pass rusher than Will Anderson was in either one of his final 2 years at Alabama, right? If you look at the PFF data, right? Now, if you just look at the raw sacks, Turner and Anderson both had 10 sacks in their final years at Alabama. Turner had 55 pressures. Anderson had 65. But on a per-snap basis, Turner's pressure rate was much higher. He had 19% pressure rate to Anderson's 17%. So that's part of the reason why Anderson had more pressures, because he got more opportunities. If you look at their pass rush win rate, Turner was 20%. Anderson was 16%. If you just look at true pass sets, which is basically PFF's way of sort of getting rid of the noise like screens and play action, where a guy can just kind of pin his ears back and get after the quarterback, how often does he win? Turner won on 33% of those snaps, while Anderson never exceeded more than 27% in his best year at Alabama. So, I don't think that's a fair knock. Oh, like Turner lacked production. I think that's just lazy analysis. Now, I think the only real knock on Dallas Turner is like, oh, he's just not a super polished pass rusher. He doesn't really have a well-developed pass rush plan. But the secret is Will Anderson didn't also really have that either in college. But I think Turner makes a ton of sense for the Falcons, right? This is the Jarvis Davis plan. We know Jarvis is going to be pushing for this for the next 7.5 weeks. He's been pushing for this for, the last 7.5 years, really, for the Falcons to use a premium pick on a pass rusher like this at the top of the draft. But I think Turner makes a ton of sense for the Falcons. He fits this scheme with the 3-4 defense. He'll play that Sam linebacker role that we saw Arnold Ebiketie playing. Unlike Ebiketie, Turner is a natural, much more comfortable dropping in the coverage, which he'll do under Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake, because, we saw Leonard Floyd have a very similar role in Los Angeles under Raheem Morris and in previous stops under Staley and Vic Fangio as well. And so that's sort of a natural fit in this 3-4 scheme, especially when you're going to run as many simulated pressures as the Falcons are likely to do. That's something the Rams did a ton of last year as a way to sort of dial up their pass rush more effectively, and having that sort of outside edge rusher that you are comfortable dropping, and then you can sort of disguise your pressure by sending Caden Ellis or sending Troy Anderson or sending somebody else, a nickel corner, whoever that may be, on those simulated pressures. Dallas Turner is a great fit in that as he continues to develop as a more refined pass rusher. So I think the path for Dallas Turner to be the Falcons pick at 8 is probably a path where those 3 wide receivers all are off the board by the time we get there, because I think because of the, the BPA stuff, best player available, if one of those guys is there, if Neighbors or Odunze is there, I think the Falcons are very likely to walk away from the draft with one of those guys. So again, if you're on the same bandwagon with Jarvis Davis. You're hoping that these wide receivers get pushed up the board and go in the top 7. So speaking of wide receivers, Rome Odunze had a great combine, but we'll talk about some other wide receiver standouts, including Xavier Worthy, and whether or not these guys tested well enough to now be on the Falcons' radar. And we'll break that down, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. If I had more time, I'd be grinding more film. But what would you do with your extra time? A better way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has benefited me. It's taught me coping skills, right? Knowing that I can only control what I can control, and I can't control who the Falcons quarterback is, can't control who they draft, who they sign, whether or not they win or not. And if you're looking for some added coping skills, if you're looking for finding ways to prioritize what is meaningful to you, if you're thinking of starting therapy, you got to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, talking about some combine standouts. It was Saturday was a great day to watch the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers go out there. And probably the biggest story out of the combine is Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy, having the record-breaking 40 time of 4.21. And if you know me, you know me, I've been pushing for the Falcons adding speed. So Worthy shoots to the top of intriguing players that when we get to, this week, I'm going to really take a deep dive into the wide receivers, watching the film and whatnot. But he's going to be one of those players that I'm certainly intrigued to go through his film. I remember watching a bit of him last year when I was watching Bijan for Texas, and I liked what I saw, but there were some certain things that I wanted to see him clean up, and I'm curious to see if and when I dive into the 2023 film, whether or not he cleaned up some of those things, being a little bit more physical than 165-pound wide receiver typically is. But we got 9 guys that ran sub 4.4s. I think that was a record, if the broadcast correct, beating out the record from 2 years ago where we had like 8 wide receivers that ran sub 4.4. And, we talked about this in previous years where like they installed a faster track in Indianapolis. I forget the name of the stadium. And it's why for the last 3 or 4 years, we've consistently heard these sort of stories emerging from the combine about, oh, this is the fastest group of whatever wide receivers, edge rushers, O-linemen ever. This is, we've seen all these sort of record breaking times for various position groups over the last couple of years. And it's in part due to the fast track, but that's not to rain on anybody's parade or anything like that. And I've joked before, like when it comes to the wide receiver position, if you don't run a 4.42 or faster, I don't want you on this team. And we did get 12 guys on Saturday at the wide receiver position that did run that fast. Worthy, of course, is the standout, but you have other notables like LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas, who ran a 4.33, Texas wide receiver A.D. Mitchell ran a 4.34, UNC wide receiver Tez Walker ran a 4.36, Arizona wide receiver Jacob Cowing 4.38, Michigan Roman Wilson 4.39, Georgia's Zalad McConkey 4.39, South Carolina's Xavier Legette 4.39, Oregon Troy Franklin 4.41, Florida Ricky Pearsall 4.41, and Tulane's Jaquan Jackson 4.42. And a lot of those guys were Senior Bowl guys. Walker, Cowing, Wilson, McConkey, Leggett, Pearsall, Jackson were all Senior Bowl guys. And we know that at least under Terry Fontenot, they have really, really gone hard on Senior Bowl guys. So it's a potential possibility that any of those guys could potentially be on the Falcons' radar, especially on day 2. And of the other 6 Senior Bowl wide receivers that also ran 40s, I think 4 of those guys ran 4.50 or faster. So a lot of speed at the Senior Bowl this past year, at least based off of the combine testing. Now, if you look at the Rams drafting history, at least during the Sean McVay era, when they've drafted wide receivers, they haven't valued as much speed as maybe others have, with like Van Jefferson and Tutu Atwell, or like the 2 like burners that they've drafted in that time. But most of those wide receivers what they have in common is they have good change of direction and they tested well in agilities. And so if we're combining speed and agility, Ricky Pearsall out of Florida really stands out, right, with a 6.64 3-cone that is 93rd percentile according to mockdraftable.com. And the reason why we value the speed is, of course, because with the Falcons running game, getting more speed on the field that can help take the top off of the defense that's going to punish teams if and when they stack the box against the Falcons run game is what we're looking for. And that's something that the Falcons lacked last year, or at least in terms of the players that they did have in Scotty Miller and Van Jefferson, that, had that ability. They weren't able to sort of maximize that. So we'll see if, any of these wide receivers. I'm certainly going to be checking out all those guys, as well as probably like another dozen or more other wide receivers over the next couple of days and weeks. Maybe break those guys down for the Locked On Falcons Insiders. If you want, the latest on the Locked On Falcons Insiders, hit the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. Did a 90-minute breakdown of Jaden Daniels. I think it's my best film breakdown to date. I'm still learning through this process, but check that out if you're interested. 14-day free trial, so you can check that out for free. And if you like it, then, you get another 2 weeks of content free. And then it's $4.99 a month after that. Not to mention you get this film analysis, but you also get the one-on-one insights. You want my thoughts on a certain player, whatever, especially in free agency when you're hearing all these rumors and who's signing with who. That's a great time to become a Locked On Falcons Insider. But the last little tidbit before we duck out of here, I want to comment on is the quarterbacks, right? They also threw on Saturday. We didn't get the top three guys in Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or Caleb Williams throwing, but the next sort of three, the sort of consensus 4 through 6 guys, and JJ McCarthy out of Michigan, Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington, and Bo Nix out of Oregon did throw. And, one of the things, I thought all three of those guys looked pretty good in their throwing sessions. They weren't perfect by any means, but I saw a lot of people blasting JJ McCarthy, and I was just like, when I watched it, I was like, I think he missed 3 throws. Why are we sitting here being like this was a bad throwing session? Now 2 of those throws came when he was throwing to the left, and I've seen guys like Derek Klassen and Nate Tice recently talk about JJ McCarthy's sort of inconsistency throwing to the left. I don't think it's as bad as Mitch Trubisky was when he was in, but that is something that I do think JJ probably could clean up, and that's probably going to require some improved footwork. So, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, he missed 2 throws throwing to the left, and all of a sudden he's a bad quarterback. That I saw some people though. But in terms of other quarterbacks that stood out to me, of course, we had Bazooka Joe Milton out of Tennessee get to show off his arm strength as well as his athleticism. And another quarterback that, sort of was on the back burner for me, and I was like, I'm not probably going to get to him, but I'll probably take some time to watch him, is Devin Leary out of Kentucky, who I thought looked solid in his throwing session. So I'll get a chance to watch his film at some point as a sort of alternative day 3 option, especially in a world where the Falcons draft Kirk Cousins and then they're waiting on, drafting a quarterback, probably potentially on day 3, where they might get one of these, Joe Miltons or Devin Learys or a Spencer Rattler or whoever at that point, Michael Pratt out of Tulane. So we'll see how that all plays out, guys. But that's going to do it for us here on this Mock Draft Monday. We'll have more insight from some guests. I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about the quarterbacks later this week. I don't know exactly what day. Got to, send some texts and some emails to sort of confirm that day. But of course, continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen so that you can get, all the scoops from all the insiders 2 weeks ahead of when the insiders are giving those out to you at ESPN and The Athletic as well, so that you can become an everydayer and be that much caught up on the Falcons. So continue to subscribe to Locked On Falcons. Check out Locked On NFL Draft. Of course, they're the great place to cover some of the big storylines post-combine with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez, giving you their winners, losers, all that and more. And, of course, Locked On NFL scouting with the draft dudes, Locked On Vikings, I'm sure, we'll have some insight. Locked On Bears, I'm sure we'll have some thoughts on some of the latest buzz. Locked On Bucks with the Baker Mayfield stuff. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, guys. Your team every